I'll do a quick roll call. Special meeting, May 21st, 2018. Basting.
Here.
Bush.
Here.
Chambers.
Here.
Dunn. Here. Dunlop.
Here.
Lindsay.
Here.
And Steffes.
Here.
Yep, stand for the
Stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we're going to convene into closed session for administrative contract renewals. Hopefully we'll be out by 7.
Okay, that's a roll call vote. Need a motion to go into closed session? Motion. Motion by Dunn,
Second.
second by Chambers. All right, roll call. Bush.
Yes.
Chambers.
Here.
Yes or no to the
Yes.
closed session? Dunn.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Gunlock.
What do we want?
To go into closed session.
Oh, yes.
Steffes.
Yes.
And Basting.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we're back in open session.
Really depends on
The question was posed, what happens to the baseball diamond? At this time, there is no set or formal plan for that. Partly it's based on, we have a concept of C2. C2 does have an entryway that would cause us to have to relocate the baseball diamond if we come in off of a different entrance. And the proposal that was concepted out at the design workshop was to move it to the, adjacent to the high school. Not behind the high school, but down kind of on the lower edge of the property, more behind the Hodan Center in that area, coming in off of the road there. That was just one idea, one concept. It wasn't,
Is there a rough figure on the dollar cost of a baseball field?
I don't recall if we put a number on it. I don't think so.
Because see, you're gaining something and losing something that's going to be another cost. And,
Yeah. And that cost is not, the baseball diamond is not built into the proposed recommendation. That would be an additional cost to the district.
We didn't actually, a lot of the concepts didn't force the baseball diamond to move.
So it could
Everything was
stay.
drawn outside of it except for when the building was drawn on top of it.
I thought the road access pretty much goes right through the baseball diamond.
Not from the aerial, not from the satellite images we had. Based on where the current property lines are and where the satellite images is. And from what we could tell, there's like a street access that's annexed. And it's not school district property, city property. From what we could tell. So if you're overlapping that now, it didn't look like it from the satellite image.
On the ground level, it looks like it does. I just would say that to that
Yeah.
comment that
Yeah?
I don't see how it doesn't disrupt the ballpark. I mean, that's not
Well,
an educational issue, but
Google says 3 million.
for a baseball diamond,
Yeah. Or,
Andy had mentioned $1 million.
and I got another one here that says about 103,000.
Depends on the site.
Yeah, it depends on the site. I remember somebody at one meeting telling us that we were looking at $1 million. That was a great question, Dr. Lindsay. My problem is, all I keep hearing is how the community really, really wants this, and it's $12 million. I haven't had a single person tell me that they would vote for a $12 million addition to the elementary. Because originally we were talking 5 million, and then it went to 12. And honestly, I really believe that unless this gets a little more realistic in dollars, I don't see $12 million passing. And if I'm wrong, I will be happy to admit that. So, and my question is this a Cadillac plan? And is there a way that we can really knock this down so that it is more palatable? But that's just me personally. I'd certainly like to hear from the rest of you.
If we are the helicopter, as Aaron has said before, we're up here looking at the scope of what we want our education system to be like. I'm concerned that in 10 years, consolidation was going to happen in rural schools. No one's talking about it. It's like, it's the silent subject that's not being talked about, and in reality, it's gonna happen. So if we have 10 years down the road, there's only so much money that we can borrow, that we can get and that we can pay back within those 10 years. So, I'm going to be a helicopter on this and say that we only can afford, we can only do so much and that so much money should be spent on this. And then 10 years down the road, we're going to have to deal with another situation. But if we put $12 million in this, I mean, a consolidation does not mean that Minter Point gets a school. A consolidation means that communities come together.
Well, my comment is we have to deal with what is now, and there are a number of things that current building's not in compliance, so we have the basics to meet the compliance issues. The gym, I've heard from many people, is just not very nice, as you all know, and it's trying to function as a multiple-use room, and it's inadequate. The parking is inadequate. The bus pickup's inadequate. A lot of people complain about that. The building has a number of ADA deficiencies, so we're going to need to do something to be, I think, in compliance. So whether we face consolidation 10 years or not, we have the present issues that we have to deal
And I
with.
agree with that. I just don't think $12 million is the number we should be at.
Has anybody done the actual analysis? I mean, I realize this group came through saying it was 16 or whatever it was, dollars, thousand. But hypothetically, if we borrow $5 million, what is the actual effect on our tax base versus 6 million, 8 million, 10 million?
I can give you that exact number. I can't do each scenario because obviously each scenario is as many as you can come up with. So
Sure.
I can give you exactly 5 million because that's a scenario that I did run. So I'll pull that up as we talk. But until we decide what the project is and what you can and cannot accept and or say yes to, every time we run that scenario with bond counsel, it costs the district. So we want to limit the number of runs we do of this and try to get what's the project we're talking about that we can agree on or that the community can support. And then we can run the exact numbers, then you can decide if that is or isn't something that you want to move forward with as a resolution for the community to act on. So, but I'll pull up as you're talking the number on the 5 million that I can do.
Because hypothetically, if you have 5 million, we can double it to make 10, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Triple it for 15. Okay, Doc, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the first question is, are we going to set a dollar limit to the project? Or are we going to vote on certain concepts and, you know, parts of the project and accept the dollar amount that's been proposed? You know, like Dr. Lindsay said, do we bring the building up to code? How much is that gonna be? Do we, you know, divert the stormwater so the foundation doesn't settle again? You know, how much is that gonna be to adjust the topography around the building? Do we need a new gym? How much is that gonna cost? Do we need to change the classroom layout? You know, do we need to give?
Well, we have to, whether we get any money or not, those your kindergarten kids have to come downstairs. They're on that second floor now. And by next fall, they should be down there. That's a fire hazard for those kids.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, are there things that we feel like are non-negotiable in the project? Or are we just gonna set a limit and then just see what we can fit in that dollar figure?
Just,
So-
if I can comment on the bringing, I think you're getting 4K, correct? Yeah, so, I mean, there would have to be some serious renovations just to make that happen.
Right,
Just so we're clear. I don't see how that can happen for next fall without quite a bit of remodeling, things like that.
because the plan would be to move the library up.
Correct.
That is, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
You mean we wouldn't adjust a classroom for that downstairs? You would have to use the library for that?
you'd have to use the 2 rooms. Or you turn the library into 2 classrooms.
And why couldn't we use 2 other rooms down there?
Who's on
And
the
just
first
split
floor? Is
rooms.
Fifth grade on the first floor?
Floor is K2.
First floor is K2,
Yep.
K through 2.
First, second, yeah.
and we can't move the 2nd grade up and bring the pre-kindergartners down.
We have 3 sections of 2nd grade.
The room sizes are considerably different.
Right.
So your second grade classrooms are 770 square feet. Your preschool classrooms, they're 1,000 square feet, 100 square feet. And that's the size they should be. So you would have to create the 2 rooms that are up above into 3 second grade classrooms, and then take 3 rooms down below and create 2 preschool rooms. Which you can do, but again, that's major remodeling.
I also think we need to be very careful with completely disregarding the survey. I know that any of us have heard from people who, for whatever reason, did not fill out a survey and maybe have a differing opinion from the majority of the survey results. But, I give a lot of credence to people who took the time to fill out the survey. They got it by mail, they got it electronically, there's no excuse. If they filled it out and they spoke their piece, that gives a lot of weight to me. And that's going to weigh heavy in what I decide. And just as an aside, 2 out of the 13 design proposals for the on-campus elementary school have a baseball field retained.
Does that include a bus parking lane and parent pickup?
This is one, for example, the bus line is similar to C2, and then the parent parking lot stays the same, basically.
Okay.
So pretty minimal.
Is there one that next to this? With the baseball?
We can, looks like that expands the parent parking lot a little bit, but no, it does not connect.
Do you have a date on that?
These are all from the design workshop. And
I'm trying to look it up.
they're all published online on the website. So if you go to Mineral Point School District, and I just Googled, I didn't Google, in the search button, I hit elementary school planning, and then towards the bottom of that, it says design workshop drawings.
So we want to go through this with the project breakdown of C2.
Yep.
We all have it.
Yep.
I would say, Jeff, that's a good way to start. So things that I can support preliminarily is the parking, bus laning, and stormwater. And the construction costs, total budget is $726,000 for that.
Page 10, Larry.
Page 18.
You can go on board with that?
I do think that the parking, the parent pickup, needs attention down there. And the code maintenance and ADA items, the $2.1 million for that, I do question. I have seen numbers of as low as $500,000 to bring it up to ADA compliance.
I would like to see something on that, because sitting here for 4 years until we started this, I had never heard that we had a code violation.
I do not support a gym. I do not support any additional administration additions. And the classroom additions, I'd have to be talked into that too. That's where I'm
Well,
at.
you don't want your pre-K up on the 2nd floor.
Is it a fire hazard having pre-K on the 2nd floor?
It's,
It's illegal.
It's
Oh,
illegal.
it is?
Yeah, it's illegal.
we didn't know that until
All we'd have to do is get a phone, I mean, all parent has to make one phone call.
Well, I think that has to be corrected, but isn't that part of the ADA items?
That's not it's in the code maintenance and ADA, yes.
It's included.
Okay.
Basically to swap.
Okay.
We took the approach to swap.
Some
those-
parents just about had a heart attack when they found out it was illegal. And I wouldn't wanna be sending my pre-K there next fall.
Well, no matter what we do, that ain't gonna.
It's not gonna happen, I know.
So, okay, so we know where Larry's stands.
Is that a-
Wants to-
Is that a state statute, or is that in the AD compliance code regulation?
It's in NFPA, and I believe that specific one is.
Is that,
this
is that new construction, or remodel? Correct.
NFPA is like a law. It's like ADA, so there's no
What's the
grandfathering in.
acronym on that?
So is
What's
there,
National Fire Protection Association, I
Yeah.
think.
is
That's-
there anything we can do to get that group of kids to the ground level next year? Without totally remodeling at this point, so that we are within code.
So kindergarten's in 3 sections now, and it's gonna go to 2 sections next year? No. Okay.
And how many pre-K coming in?
52, 53. Luke, do you remember what Morgan said it was? In the 50s.
Yeah, 52, I
But
thought.
that's 4 sections, right, because they're morning for so many and afternoon for so many.
Yeah, 3 sections and then 1 early childhood section, so 4 half days.
So early childhood is included in the 52?
I don't know if they are or not.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I don't think
No?
so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm concerned with how we can get that particular item solved, and it sounds like you're telling us that there isn't any way that we could do that. I mean, there's no best case scenario, but there's gotta be a way there's room in that building that we should be able to bring those pre-K down, if that's where they belong.
If, Kevin, if an organization just moves forward on a plan and has a plan in place toward getting into compliance, then do they allow transition to, times to do that?
Absolutely. The challenge is that now that you're aware of these things, you have to have a plan in place to address the issues. Some things are building code issues, some are ADA. There's-
Somewhere,
When there is a law, it's retroactive and you have to address it, or have a plan to address it. Over time, we'll make accommodation. Because you do have this issue, there's probably some temporary solution where you could look at smaller classes. If second grade is gonna go down to 2 sections, maybe all those rooms are available. Maybe have 1 less second grade teacher and 1 more preschool teacher for 4K. Every time you want to put on it, and you divide the kids into 3 rooms instead of 2. So perhaps there's a programming solution without doing major renovation.
Do you know the reason why it's illegal? Is it fire safety?
It's fire safety, and the way it reads, it identifies that any students 5 years or under, or 6 years or under, cannot be more than 36 inches above or below the main level, something like that is how.
Is that the code?
My eyes aren't that good anymore.
Mine,
Let's see.
you need a magnifying glass with
You're asking, is
Is
this
that
the
the code? Is that-
NFPA?
Well, it's under gov.
This kid's upstairs away from the main entrance in today's environment.
It's saying it has to have 2 exits
So what?
with some information.
Are you asking, is this the particular section of the
Yeah.
NFPA?
So I gather we may not be able to pick and choose too many items here,
Yeah.
really, in a way, some way.
Yeah, I think we can. I think that drop-off area for kids can be changed. I'm just gonna throw it out there because it's an idea, it doesn't mean that it's right, it's just an idea. But, what's the street that goes between the bleachers and the old high school?
Center Street.
I mean, why can't kids whose parents are dropping them off be dropped off at that stop sign there and they walk down that short road, which is one way during school time, because that happens. And then they walk that whole block to school, like they actually walk a block to school. And then the parents can just go straight out Center Street and take a left or a right when they get to the middle school. I mean, I think there has to be solutions that are reasonable without digging up a bunch of land. And I think it's reasonable for children who can walk a block. I mean, it seems to me that I would like to know how many parents drop their kids off who are bus eligible.
The winter would be the only thing on that I would see.
Yeah,
Snow
or
and-
disabled.
Well, which I
No,
guess.
I'm talking about kids who can walk, not disabled kids.
I'm fine
There's
with
a whole
kids
different, there's a whole other area for
Disabled.
handicap.
Mhm.
I guess they would plow that street anyway.
I mean, I think we have to be creative and think outside the box here.
Well, the stormwater, bus lane, parking are all lumped into one sum. I think the stormwater is a necessity if we're going to maintain that building in its current site.
I agree.
I've heard comments either way about whether we need more parking or not, so if there's gonna be a parking lot expansion. We can argue about the bus lane, I think that's reasonable. I mean, I think if we're gonna pare down the project, it seems like the most elective would be the gym and the kind of office lobby front entrance expansion. Unless the location of the entrance has to change based on what we decide for parking and drop-off and bus lane, because a lot of designs move the entrance to the
Yeah.
northwest side of the building.
Was there any plans at all to keep the bus drop-off where it was? And maybe just reconfigure the front of the building? Was that looked at? Does anybody know?
That was not a plan that we studied in any detail, because
I'm just curious.
the situation's already, that's what you already
You
have.
said it wasn't.
So just out of curiosity.
Kevin, in your opinion, what are the benefits? You had mentioned boring under the school for stormwater, has that changed? That was, I remember, something originally
Yeah, that was one solution.
that's not what you're proposing here?
What we did was we put in a budget to cover that scenario, as kind of the most extensive scenario. I think it's important to note that what we created in the dollars is a budget that you can definitely work within. There's significant contingencies within here. It's always our experience that projects don't happen right away. And if we have too low of numbers, 5 years later, when a project happens, inflation can really torpedo the whole
Well,
budget.
you built in the contingencies for that though.
Correct,
So if we had certain items, you would still build in a contingency.
correct,
So we don't have to worry about that.
right.
At
So
the
what I'm
current-
trying
at
to
the
say
current
is,
Price.
the numbers are large enough
Right.
to create a budget for you. These aren't,
They're not stone, they're not set in stone.
they are not, and they're
I was
not.
just curious if that was
specific to-
still in that.
There's a
in
budget
those
to do that,
figures.
and we think
Okay.
that you need to do that. You have some storm water lines down there now, and some of them are clogged, some of them drain. I walked around there while it's raining. And
Today?
you can see them overflowing.
What's the benefit, in your opinion, to bore underneath the school as opposed to reroute the water around the school if we're gonna excavate for a gym?
I think the benefit is, if a gym ended up on that side of the building, it would be difficult to go all the way around at the depths that we need to go. And to go under the building really isn't that hard with the boring equipment that is available now.
I'll attempt to answer Jeff's question with regards to mill rate. I'm going to start here and I'll come back to this chart in just a second. What we did is we re-engineered this, or reverse engineered this, because what we gathered from the survey was that people's tolerance was somewhere in that $12 to $16 per month range is what the tax threshold was for a project that they could support. So what we did is worked it backwards and said, well, how much would $12 a month or $144 a year on an annual home with a fair market value of $150,000 buy you in referendum dollars? What we found is that it would buy us $5.5 million worth of project at $12 per month. So that gives you kind of an entry-level point of where the tolerance level was. And again, if we go back to the survey, that was by far the most majority of people. It's interesting if you break it down by teaching staff and by non-teaching staff, people with kids in the district, people without kids in the district, but that tolerance is clearly in that $12 to $16 per month range. And we reversed engineered the 16 as well, but I'm using the 15 or the $12 per month scenario for this particular case. I think that
5 million, did you say?
5.5, yeah. So it's a $4 million bond and a $1.5 million bond. The next piece, and I'll come back to this in just a second, that is important for us to understand is what's happening currently in our mill rate. As we recall, the state aid is increasing, which means our levy is decreasing this year. Right now, we're at $12.09 in this fiscal year, and next year we're projected to be at $11.29. We can project that pretty confidently because we're in a biannual budget and there's not much that's changing. If you look just a year ago at $12.43 and you look a year beyond the $11.29, we continue to have some savings. Our $12.43 to $11.24, trying to smooth out the highs and the lows over the past 3 years and the next 3 years, is roughly about an 80-cent difference of what our mill rate will drop if in a do-nothing scenario. Our mill rate will just simply go down. So then we start to look at the net impact of what would happen to a taxpayer if we looked at backfilling that drop-off with some referendum dollars. And going back to that previous chart, if you remember sorry, get this off here. Back to here. This mill rate at $12 threshold buys you the net mill rate on average over that 20-year bond is 96 cents. So to your point, if you take that 5.5 million and you double it, it gets you up to the $11 million. So the mill rate would also double at 96 and go up to $1.92. Now take off the 80 cents that the mill rate's going to drop, the $1.92 minus the 80 cents, puts you at a 73-cent net increase. Now that 73 cents is less than a 96 cents, which is what people are saying they can tolerate at a $12 per month, or $144 annually. So in actuality, when we look at the net impact from somebody over the last 3-year average to the next 3-year average, their net mill rate will actually be less than $12 per month. So you could do the full 11.9 million and stay around that $12 per month tax impact if you look at it over kind of a historical trend. And I can back that up because I know mill rates can kind of get tricky sometimes, and ask me some questions that can clarify a little bit. So in short, you can do everything on that list for about $12 a month.
Can you go back to that slide with the mill rates on it?
You sure can. This has all the top information, feeds into the total levy and mill rate. You can also get it as you go across here, the different municipalities that feed into that mill rate. And then you get the actual mill rate down here at the bottom, with a percent increase or decrease.
What's the payoff, how many years?
This is a 20-year bond.
I can't support a 20-year bond.
Can you
In
go up
10
just a
years,
little
it's
bit
gonna change.
more? Oh, the other way. I just want to see what that red is and the yellow represents in them graphs.
The only thing I'll say, Kelly, is they've been talking consolidation for
There you
20
go, right
years,
at the bottom.
but it's never been,
It's
the only way it'll
it's
ever
gonna
happen is
start.
if the
It's
state
gonna start.
forces on us.
Yeah, it's the
And
different funds,
districts.
Larry, Fund 10, 38, 39, 41, and 80, are the different pieces that add up to that levy. The schools are not permitted to do a 30-year bond, like a 30-year mortgage. 20 is the maximum that you can take a bond out for school projects or referendums. You can do shorter bonds, obviously more principal, less interest over the 10-year note, but traditionally schools are bonded at a 20 years.
Are the bond rates fixed then on that 20-year bond? Are they fixed or is there an inflationary clause when you?
When we lock in the bond itself, and again, this is bonds at this current rate, but you look at the impact of the principal and the interest, the rate itself will be fixed, but they try to smooth it out over that 20-year period so that you're not hitting some highs and lows in those areas. So the mill rate will bounce from 96 to 97 cents back and forth. So you're not paying a bulk of that on the back end or front end when you're paying.
So if we decide to move ahead with this as a referendum, then are we also forced to ask for more operation? Because we're already running short.
Not forced to ask for more operations. It is an option that the board could consider, but there's nothing that would necessitate it. The only thing that does come into the new state statutes around referendums is there can only be 2 questions that are asked. And those 2 questions, only one of them can be bond related and only one of them can be operationally related. So anything that you put into a bond question has to be the question. In other words, you couldn't ask a second question for everything but the gym, and then a second question for the gym, and then a third question for operations.
So we have to determine what we're asking the money for, and it can be 2 questions.
It can only be 2 questions. My second piece to this that I need to then research as I hear myself talk, can you ask 2 bond questions?
That's what,
Or
yeah.
can you ask 2 operation questions? I don't think so.
Or
but I will
one
look into
operations
that.
and one,
Or 1 operation. I know you can do 1 bond and 1 operation.
Okay.
That I know for sure.
okay.
The question is whether you can do 2 bonds and no operation, but I know it is a maximum 2 question. But this all came out this year, so I have to do some research. The other piece that should be just known for the board is that they now have a rule that you can only ask 1 referendum question per calendar year. So from January 1 to December 30, you get 1 referendum. This being in November, potentially a November question. You could go back in April if it didn't pass and come back with something else and come back, but you couldn't come back then again in November. Or you could go November to November, but only 1 time per calendar year.
Can you check on that?
That I'm
The
pretty certain
bond-
on.
no, the
Oh,
bond.
bond question.
Can you ask 2
I
bond
might be able to
questions?
even pull it up.
Because that gives us some options for those of us that,
I think it is.
Respect.
I mean, I just heard a conversation about this a week and a half ago. DPI's interpretation was 2 bond questions and everything that Luke's been saying, but I think you could have 2 capital, because that's what we were talking about, was 2 capital questions, and it was decided instead to do a capital and an operating. This was the Waterloo School District.
Is it true?
so you believe you could do 2 bond questions?
I believe you could.
Is it true that if you fail, if you propose an operational referendum and fail, then there's a penalty in state aid that lasts 3 years unless you pass another referendum?
I am not aware of that.
That is if you are not, if you're a low spending school and they're trying to get you that additional dollar amount
Oh, to try to bring you up to
to try to bring you up, so if you go for a referendum and fail, you're right, you're locked in at that rate. Otherwise, the state will bump you up and move you up to a higher initial
Okay,
funding level.
so we don't, that doesn't apply to our,
It
the
does
school
not.
district?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, correct.
And did they limit that we could do a referendum only once a year?
They did, only 1 time per calendar year.
So hypothetically, if we go in November, if it would fail, then we could do it again next year.
Sometime in the year.
Anytime in the
year.
calendar year, but only once.
Anytime in 2020.
Well, we know where Larry stands, what's everybody else think?
I got a question on the interest rates up there, Luke, are they, You were at 4 and 4.25
Mhm.
up there. Do you think that's where we would be at? And did you do some research?
No, it would be where the bond market was at the time that we ran this scenario 2 weeks ago. It would not be reflective of where we would be when we go to referendum in November. And this is a pretty conservative approach. We have been able to work with some local financing, and we've always been able to beat the bond council's market rate. They shop this out, they'll search for the best rate for that bond, and traditionally we have found better interest rates in our backyard.
That's the reason I asked, is it does get a little high for.
It is conservative, yeah. That we're trying not to misrepresent anything, but we don't know also what the economy is going to do between now and November. So we would actually lock in that bond council at the point of, or I'm sorry, the interest rate at the time that we have an approved referendum.
So you were talking about 11.9 million for 20 years. Going back to that 5.5 million, we could really do the same payments for 10 years then, like Kelly was referring to.
Yeah.
If the board chose to go there.
Mhm.
At 12 million,
Was it? No, divided that
divide that in half,
in half. Yeah. I think the high school was a 20-year bond, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And similar amount, just
And
to
that's
kind of
what
have some historical.
It was paid off.
And that, yeah, and that's what I'm concerned about. We haven't addressed any issues in the high school, I mean, for safety and that. I mean, there's other things that are going to have to be addressed. So, you know, that's my concern. I'll tell you what number I'll put on it. I put on 7,500,000 to Aaron's point. Maybe it goes back to the committee and they decide, and then we're not disrespecting their work. But 10 years, 7.5. That's what I fiscally can do, because I have a nose for the future, and I predicted things in 1995 that are happening now in this culture and politics and everything. And people thought I was nuts then. I think we're going to consolidation in 10 years, and I think people are going to have to learn to be inclusive and as a community, and I just think that's going to happen. I don't think operations are going to be able to handle
Where
it.
did you come up with your 7 million? Just-
That's a number I came up with that I feel comfortable with, that we're not overspending, that the committee
Okay.
can come back and figure out what to do.
Did you include a gym in that number, or
No,
were you?
No, I'm not Jim.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
I don't, I don't necessarily know that you're wrong, Kelly. I think creating larger classrooms, I think it's possible that a 100-student district or 100-student high school, 200-student district down the road in 10 years may be forced to look for an answer. And I think it puts us in a better situation to absorb a consolidation. Because I don't think the answer is going to be building a bunch of buildings everywhere.
Right,
It's going to be who's got room, who's got good facilities.
and it may be neutral land. It may not be in a specific town, it may be neutral
No, but then
area.
we're talking
Yeah.
about building facilities, and I don't think that's the answer
Right,
they're gonna go to if it's state mandated or
right,
financially mandated. I think they're just gonna be looking for assistance possibly. So I think creating classroom size, if that's a concern, isn't necessarily a bad idea. I don't think if we're sitting 10 years into a bond,
right.
that the state's gonna say, sorry, we're shutting you down and making you build a new building, and you still have to pay your bond for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I know they're not always reasonable, but that's,
Well, and I'm not saying that this may be state mandated. I think that it may be county or community driven, that, you know, how this would happen.
And a question that we haven't talked about at all tonight is our enrollment. You know, will we stay in a declining enrollment? Will in 10 years, Mineral Point get a manufacturing company, bring in some high-end jobs to increase our enrollment? I mean, there's a lot of what ifs there. That would be best case scenario. Can you
Well,
propose that?
something that attracts them is a good school and a good school
You're absolutely
facility,
right,
you know,
but
so I think you gotta play both ends of that.
Mhm.
question. On my standpoint, I think they've shown that the majority of the public would go for the $12 to $16, which allows us to do all of the things here. And I have to admit, I've come away from the idea of a new school up next to the high school. If we had all the money in the world, I think that's still the best thing to do. But this looks like it would pass a referendum. It wouldn't ruin the mill rate, and we'd get all the things fixed, and we'd have the things we need, which would make this even a more attractive school district in addition to its educational excellence. The facilities would be excellent. So I think trying to poke holes into this doesn't need to be done from what I've heard based on the research. So I would be actually in favor of doing the whole project.
That's why I'm in line with Doc, that I think that, I don't want to discount the survey, because those people are people who certainly are going to vote. And obviously a referendum's going to get a high voter turnout. But I don't want to discount the feedback that says 60% of non-parent grandchildren or higher support every project. Now, we could split that into two questions. If there's majority support for this part, and this part, and the second question for the rest of it, if that's an option. But I think we need to ask the public, based on the responses we got, the full question.
I don't have a problem, I agree with everything you just said, but I think your second question has to be operational. Because we're already struggling to try to meet our budget, and there's no way you're gonna spend $12 million and be able to keep it open if we don't have operational cash to deal with.
Well, just to address that, Jeff, when I looked through when he had redone this, I think he came up with only a 56,000 shortfall, wasn't that what I saw at the final tally? So somehow or another, $310,000 disappeared, which made our budget shortfall only 56 in the board book we sent out. So we're in a lot better shape than we were
I
our
agree.
previous meeting.
No, I agree
There's
with
some
John.
things in there still, I think, that could be cut yet, but 56,000 is a far cry different than 366 or 365.
But you're right, Jeff, we do have to address.
We have to do both,
We have to
I
address the
understand.
recurring
Yeah.
deficit one way or the other, whether
Yeah.
it's operational referendum or.
But I would hate
Long-lasting
to ask for both, you know,
Right.
because I think if you put
I
this in
think
front,
that's
that's
a
not,
tough
I
ask.
think it's our responsibility then to make sure this thing is balanced. If we can.
Well, I agree with a lot of people here. I think if we're gonna prioritize, I think it obviously has to be, safety would be paramount in my opinion, education next, and then down the line. But I can also agree with Doc Lindsay 100% too, where, look, we asked the public, and Dr. Dunn said the same thing, we asked the public, this is what the survey, if they didn't fill out the survey, well then, in my opinion, they don't have a foot to stand on.
That's wrong. They write their check once a year to our
They right
school.
there, they pay their taxes,
But
they
but
write
why
their
didn't,
check.
but why didn't they fill out the survey when we asked their opinion?
Whatever reason they have is okay with me.
Yeah, that's
And
not our business.
366 out of 20, I don't know how many surveys you sent out, 21, 2,200? To me, that's really not a good comparison of,
Well, look at the national voting turnout, I mean, that's reflective of our society.
I have no problem doing whatever the majority of the board wants to do, but I think we need to give these guys some direction. So
do we,
I'm hearing,
the enrollment, look, did you have that chart up there?
Yeah, I have it's basically flat, slightly declining. That enrollment report is here for your review. It's underneath the elementary school. Basically, it said, again, that it's only accurate up to about 5 years, and after 5 years, it starts to really trend off. It's not very accurate. It has a flat to slightly declining at the elementary, a modest and increasing at the middle school and high school as those kids come up through the building. It's hard to project, but trends show that the elementary school population will be between the 260 to 315 range. And that's using a couple different models. It's hard to predict birth rates and
Sure. Did you have a graph of the past 5 years up there?
yeah,
That's the one I was looking at.
yep. There's different predictors there. It can kind of bump this
10
down.
years action. And that is elementary.
K-5.
K-5. They broke it out again for middle school, high school, and district.
And I just want to make a comment. I agree that having a great school is part of the decision for people to move to community. I don't think it's the only decision. Studies are showing that people are moving back to where the jobs are, and not everyone is willing to drive. And we are a bedroom community. So it can't just be the school that's the driver. There has to be other things in the community that drive it. But to say that the school is the main driver, that's a misnomer.
Well, I'm sure it's not the main driver. You're right.
What do you need from us?
There's no action tonight. We will put it on for additional discussion and/or action at the regular meeting in June. We'll also have it as an opportunity in July. There's no need or sense of urgency, but by the August board meeting, we will have to at some point decide if we are going to resolution that deadline of August 13th is the final date to have the proper notifications in place for an election. So you can take the time that you need and make a decision when you're ready. Maybe this meeting will allow us to get some additional feedback. We can wrap this up today without any action if you're okay with that. Certainly you can always make a motion, but it's not scheduled for action. 365 surveys in my experience would be one of the best response rates I've seen in any effort that we've ever done in my 7 years. Roughly about 1,000 people voted in the April election. So you're getting, I would say, a third of the electorate, not the entire population, but that's by nature why they call it a survey. You're getting hopefully a representative sample. I was impressed by the number of people that did not have kids in the school and that did not attend any of the workshops or any of the design workshops. They were people that I think are coming to this with an opinion without being educated throughout the process. And I think the chart I have here for the kids without survey, the kids that were on without kids in the district, the survey support, I thought was the most compelling piece to this whole process that I would not have anticipated is that in some cases, in almost every case, it matched and in some cases exceeded the level of support by people that had kids in the district. I think that bids this group really well to have something that the community can say yes to, because their survey has said, we support these initiatives, these efforts we can get behind and say yes to. We've either been informed about them or we find them to be credible enough to at least ask the question. To your point, Larry, I don't think it grabs everybody, but my hope is it grabbed enough that it gives you the direction you need to be able to say yes to whatever you're comfortable with.
I have a question too, go ahead.
I'm just curious, do we need to know prior to deciding what we want to put to question, whether the bus lane as written in C2 and as part of this number impedes the baseball field, which would require?
I think people should know that.
It would help me, Andy, also.
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
Because that's,
and my understanding of that charrette was that it would potentially require replacement of the baseball field. If we found that we have an access and we can build a road adjacent to the baseball field, I think that's significantly different. But I know that was a lot of feedback. It was a lot of people were a big fan of the bus lane and the new.
I think,
Yeah, they like that
I
drive.
think if we, what do you want to say here? I think if we assume that the baseball diamond will need to be moved, I think we'll have a lot more design options when it comes time to decide what do we want to do with the building and the site, and if the gym gets approved, where do you put the gym and where do you put the entrance, and I think we'll have a lot more flexibility if we assume that the baseball diamond gets moved.
And I'm not opposed
No,
to.
I'm just
Yeah,
as a point of
I agree.
clarification.
I agree.
I think if we try to shoehorn the baseball diamond into the current elementary school campus, we're going to have limitations on what we can do,
And
depending on what gets approved.
then
My
how does the
question would
public
be-
know that? How do we inform the
Does
public?
that have to be
Well,
included in the number?
I think we need
that
to
ask for?
keep it in consideration when the board decides what to take to referendum.
But the public needs to know that first.
Okay,
I mean, we will
Right,
get it
so-
if they don't know that.
so, I mean, my assumptions tonight, we're not voting on anything, right?
Right,
So, and I'm sensing that some people need more input than they've already gotten from the community. So, I think it's fair to say that, you know,
we,
number one, we welcome additional input after this meeting to any board member, especially people who did not fill out a survey, you know, regarding what they think about all of this. And then I think that the baseball diamond issue needs to be in the discussion, you know.
And if we're gonna cost us another $1 million, we need to know that,
Right,
if we're gonna move it.
right.
I agree with everything Doug said, so.
My question to Luke is, let's say XYZ gets approved, do you have an overseer project manager that's part of the school that oversees the, you know, like checks off the costs and,
Sure.
how's that work once you get a project going?
It would be a joint effort. There would be an operations committee that the board has selected that would be working with myself. There would probably be, probably more initially as we start, because there's a lot of actual planning processes that would take place after the referendum's approved to actually get to the point where the final drawing, not the concept, but the actual what will be built is put together. And that's
Well,
gonna-
I'm thinking about expense, I'm going on the
Watching,
expense side.
okay,
Yeah,
the
watching
punch list
what
part of
they're
it.
building out.
yeah.
You know, like with a hospital remodel, you know, we exactly
Yeah.
had somebody hired that was, the project manager was paid,
Mhm.
and then they made sure that things weren't being overbilled and,
Right.
you know, things that supposedly showed up, you know, didn't show up and we
That wasn't
didn't
in
have
the
paid,
contract,
right?
yeah.
Things like that.
That would be my primary role
Okay.
as part of the business manager piece. However, I would welcome the operations committee to again join that process, even or the finance committee. Could be part of that process to review monthly the incoming expenditures, the draws on the bond. There is, in some cases, districts have used what I would call an owner's representative, somebody that comes in that is not necessarily, they're working on behalf of the district, but they're working between the architect, general contractor, and the district to make sure that the best solution is being offered at the best cost available. They usually take a percentage of the entire project to coordinate that effort. I'm not sure in this particular case of a remodel that that's necessary. I think if we were doing a whole new elementary building and a new site location, but it is up for the board to consider and do some homework around an owner's representative, and if that's the best interest for us. Because it's a relatively small project, I know 12 million seems to be big, but it's contained to one site. I think we can do that internally with the wisdom between our board and myself, and Marcia John, obviously, is our bookkeeper, will keep good tabs on the expenditures.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else?
If I can volunteer, as I said, this is not on the meter tonight, but I'd like to respond to your questions with the detail, and I can do that in the next few days so that you have the answers. And one of the questions I wrote down was to get the exact NFPA code line item for the 4K. I can provide that. And another one question was, does the bus lane actually impede the current baseball field? And I can confirm that. Are there other questions that it would help me to try to confirm for you any details specifically related to the assessment or the design or the...
I think we asked out the seating would be in the gym, because we never did find out the actual number of seating.
Okay.
What else? We had some other
Would you,
questions.
Kevin, would you be able to estimate the cost of a new baseball diamond depending on what site it would be at?
We just built one a year ago, and we
Based on your
just
current,
priced one out for River Ridge 2 weeks ago with the general contractor, so, yeah, we can
Oh,
easily.
what'd you come up with?
Well, we did this at River Ridge, and we were creating new baseball diamond on the practice field. We had to do some grading. Matter of fact, we were cutting about 3 feet on the inside of the field. But it was about $500,000. There's a lot of site work involved in it. And that does include 2 dugouts and the light.
Lights, seating?
Typical bleachers. How many seats do you want? Every baseball diamond we've ever done is totally different than the last one we did. So it's really difficult to say, here's what a baseball diamond costs.
Thank you.
Other questions that I could try to answer?
Can you answer how we can move those pre-kindergartners down at the elementary for a year? Until
I
it
think
gets
that's a
done?
programmatic question. I really do.
Well, you were out to get some people.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I think I could work with Matt, and we could probably figure something out.
Jeff, I'll talk to I have a leadership team meeting tomorrow after school, and I can bring it up during our meeting.
Preliminary budget development area.
This is an opportunity for the board to discuss the budget. Preliminarily, we had a summary that showed a deficit of $17,000 at our last meeting. The board voted to take action to balance that budget. And as we worked over time to try to get to the point of a balanced budget, what I can offer is some suggestions that we can go line item by line item if the board likes, or take this any way you want. This is your opportunity to discuss. But essentially, if we were to take all expenditures and essentially just freeze them at their current levels, all budget numbers, roughly in excess of $1,000, other than things that have been approved already, like salaries and benefits, things like paper that we've already approved, any of those items that have already been approved are built into the budget, remain in the budget. If we did just a simple budget freeze of all other budget increases, roughly the bottom line is $308,000 is the savings with a freeze. When we talk about budgets, I want you to think of this almost as like an English paper, where last time, actually go back to April 23rd, it was our first draft. Actually, it was an outline, more specifically. Our June meeting was probably our first draft, and now we're trying to do some reiterations of that first draft. But we're not ready to submit it until October. That's when the final paper gets graded. So as we continue this as a working document, this is not a perfect scenario, but it does essentially get us close to that 317 number. I keep in mind that just 3 more kids open enrollment at $7,000 a piece, and you're across the finish line here. So I think you want to be comfortable enough that if you are trying to balance the budget, that you're within striking distance at the last minute, and wait to see how the numbers of enrollments come in. So we can go through and I can show you where I froze additional places. Some of these are not easy cuts to make, but when you add up a bunch of 3s and 2s and 3s, they start to add up over time. There's no lump sum that came off of the budget other than we did reduce capital. The capital expenditures now has a $20,000 contingency fee in it. Should something go wrong, we have $10,000 in contracted services and $10,000 in equipment. I think of the freezer refrigerator scenario. We would have something that would cover that without having to go to fund balance. You wouldn't have a lot of those things to be able to cover. To be honest, if the boiler went down and it cost us $100,000 to replace the elementary boiler, we'd be going to fund balance anyway. So that's kind of the reality of what my thinking is as we go through it. So the only other thing that I did not touch at this time is utilities. And the reason that is I think utilities are just something that's volatile. You get a cold year, you get a warm year, you get good numbers, you get not so good numbers. So we've just kind of tried to hold them on a 3-year trend line. But I would suggest, and given Kevin's report on the dust collector at the June meeting, that we could reduce electrical here at the high school somewhat and still be okay. But I have not reduced that at this time. So utilities have just kind of held with some modest increases to build in for inflationary costs of utility increases. So let me stop and just kind of see what the board would like to do. If you'd like to go through, and I can show you where the 3s and the 1s and the 2s are coming from, and we can talk about that. The only other piece I wanted to share before we go into that work session is that I did share with the board some information about the server situation and the sand situation. I did build that back in because I got further clarification from our third-party support system, Dependable Solutions. It wasn't scheduled to be implemented this year. It was part of a 2-year plan across 2 budgets. So I think it is important that if we don't make that $15,000 investment for the 2 servers this year and the sand the following year, that we're actually delaying this out an additional 2 years out. And I think that is getting pretty far out for servers that have been in this building prior to my arrival. So
You've sold me on that, but I'd like to go through it and see where you
Okay.
found the 300,000.
So the first place, we have built in an increase, and what you'll see is the budget, the unexpended amount in that budget, and then the new budget. Some of these increases, we've just simply frozen at existing levels, so took it out of postage, and this 100 series is all out of the elementary. What we have here is taking out the additional equipment purchases at the elementary. What's in that line item, I would have to go back to all of the teachers' requests and math requests, but it does have technology as a tagline. I know this, Matt, is Carrie's budget at 11.5, and it would basically freeze that. There are some things in that budget that are covered by Common School Fund. The 11.5 are things that are not, and I can go specifically into what that 11.5 is if you want to get into that level of detail.
The 48,750 would be items such as
Can you name some
smartphones.
equipment that's inside of that number? Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Smart board replacement, Chromebook replacement, just anything that plugs in is.
Projectors.
Yeah.
I think we have some projectors that are bad in classrooms and so forth.
So we don't have any money built in for replacements?
That would take all of that out, correct?
I don't like that. Personally, I think that's wrong.
Already, just in the few you've already mentioned, it's already, what it looks like to me is all you're doing is kicking the can down the road a year. Just to be able to say we're balancing, but we're just going to compound it for the next year because we're not going to have anything at all to fall back on.
So as we go through here, you'll see that basically any item that was a budget increase to account for an overrun last year has just been frozen. So we're going to try to live under last year's budgets, knowing that everything is costing more this year, but we're going to have to tighten the belt and just try to live within our means. As we go through, there is literally no other place to pull. Basically what I took is any budget increase that was $1,000 or more, we just pulled it off. That totals 308. So anything else has already been cut. You'll see a lot of, in this column, the minus, the minus, the minus, the minus as we go through these. All these minuses were already cut. And now we're into this column on the right-hand side of the things that I said we had a budget increase and we've additionally cut out. So essentially, there is absolutely nothing left. That is 308. That's a budget freeze. So now, if we want to go to a budget reduction mode and start to roll back from last year's amounts, that's where the next level is. So if you say go further and go deeper, then we gotta start to.
Or budget increases is less than 1,000,
But yeah, now we start putting the 250s and the 700s together, right?
which
Right.
might get
It
you a little
will,
closer,
yeah,
but
so yeah, to your point, here's
it's not
480.
absolutely nothing, but it's almost nothing.
To your point, here's gas at the elementary, we built a 480 increase and electricity a 780 increase. So
We
we
could
take
get
that
the category,
780,
you could
yeah,
put that under
run
utilities,
Right.
I guess, which you said you didn't want to touch.
Which we can, it's $1,100, but we did run last year gas. We ran over, and this isn't, the fiscal year's not done yet. So to date, we're over budget by $440 on a $16,000 budget with 2 months left to go. So we're still running gas to heat, water heaters and so forth. So we did build in that 480 to try to account for that increase, but if we go back, it's hard to use less gas, but maybe we can turn it down a thermal and run a degree cooler in the buildings or something like that. If we keep going down the line, the next area that I reduced, this is Chris McCoy, audiovisual in the library, and then books in the library had a $2,000 increase in the budget for that. The 1,000 is taking out textbooks at the elementary. That's for Kim Diefenbach, who is our literacy interventionist, so we would freeze that budget at this time. 2,300, this is the college reimbursement for Matt, and we haven't acted on that yet, but he would not need any tuition or college reimbursement for this upcoming year if the board were to take action on that tonight. These are additional equipment purchases for physical education. Tom Engel has made a request. He had $64 in his budget for equipment. That was increased $1,436. We would be increasing that at the $50 level.
We'll go back,
Mhm.
go down, stop at,
Sure.
just a minute.
Again, all of these minuses have already been reduced prior to tonight's meeting.
Got it?
Moving down to summer school, we had $2,000 in there to pay extra duty workers. We'd have to use current levels of staffing. Summer school personnel services, and summer school personnel services contracted fleet, providing transportation. This is under the operational budget, so we would not be providing transportation. Do you know, Matt, what might be under that contracted fleet number, or just from previous years? We transport,
I think we ran 2 buses, no, 3 buses.
okay, so we may have to build that back in if we have a busing last year, like, I can't recall for summer school.
Summer school?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm sorry, we did.
okay. So that would remove busing for summer school at this point.
That is,
Is that required?
That was just moving it a line, right? With
Looks like
7,000
it's-
budgeted the line above, and we moved it to contracted fleet,
Correct,
and then we cut it completely.
correct,
So now we're saying we're not busing summer school at all.
correct. In this particular scenario, again, a draft we're talking
Right,
about.
so this would be for next year.
This,
Is that reimbursable transportation? You're in summer school?
but I don't know, I can look into that. Penny Weagle had made a request for some textbooks, so that budget would be frozen at 0. Middle school, now the 200 series, we would again hold postage flat. Workbooks for band would not be able to be provided. We did increase the workbook fees, but this was not part of that, so we would either have to get by without workbooks and run worksheets off the copiers, or we would just have to go without workbooks this year. General supplies in math, I'm not sure exactly what Mike Chambers had requested. Vicki wasn't able to attend tonight, but he had a request for some general supplies in math. He's traditionally had a $0 budget, made a request this year. We would be freezing that request for another year.
And he hasn't had any for a while.
No.
So, it's textbooks?
I'd have to get into the detail, so we're at the budget level. I have to pull up the request
If
sheets.
he hasn't made one for a while and he's now made one, what, if it's a textbook, can we find out how old it is?
I'm sure it's not a text because it's only $1,200,
Okay,
so $1,250. Yeah, we'd have to get back into the detail again.
yeah, let's note that one, okay?
411 is instructional supplies. I will make a note just to let you know what his request was.
Okay, is that reasonable?
Yeah, it being that he traditionally doesn't ask for anything or doesn't have a budget, so if there's a
So,
number
yeah,
there, it's
yeah,
it's
then
kind of a
he's-
unique special request for something he's doing in the classroom. Again, now we're at the high school level, the 400 series, we'd again freeze postage. In this particular case, in the athletics, we would look to reduce the extra duty workers. These are people that would be ticket takers, site control, or site crowd control, non-staff workers that trying to think of the other roles and responsibilities that would be part of these 2 line items. So that would be a reduction. We may not be able to put people at both entrances to a basketball game, for example. We may only have enough to support one entrance.
Or spring sports, not paid out of that yet,
That's correct.
so that 18,000 remaining will decrease.
Yeah, it's only year-to-date through, you're right, there has, some end-of-the-year stuff going on in spring yet that will impact that.
But they don't have many extra duty workers because we don't charge.
Spring is rather, yeah, because there's no ticket taking for softball, baseball, track is away.
So that number may,
It's the postseason
the
stuff.
minus 20,000 may
Surplus.
reflect closer to actual budget this year.
Yeah.
I mean, if we come in at 110, 112.
Was that the additive pay schedule where you approved
It
less?
is not, no.
This is over and above that?
This is over and above that. This would be, it probably has contracted officials in there. You have your workers, your ticket takers, your ticket sellers, and you have your site control, crowd control.
Well, it makes sense to maybe ask for volunteer ticket takers, but
Right now,
you gotta pay officials.
of course.
Right. And so maybe clarify that whether that's in there or not.
Yeah. The problem with volunteers is there's not accountability that goes along with it.
No, I mean, I get it, it's not ideal.
So
I think the chain guys are accountable.
I think
Yeah,
they're
the chain-
volunteer already, if I'm not mistaken. I think-
Yeah, but I mean, they're accountable or they get in trouble.
Yeah,
Well, I get paid.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
okay.
I don't, they do?
Yeah.
I don't think Mark would take you.
Announcers, scorers, timers, all of that would be part of that process.
Keepers, everything like that.
So again, we may reduce the number of people available to do some of those pieces. Some of those may have to move to volunteer.
I'll be sure to pass on to Vicki tomorrow, your names for volunteers.
Right, exactly.
Because she's the one that, you see the emails coming from, I need help with X, Y, and Z, so.
Noted.
Maybe when we're looking at that, if the revenue piece of it was included.
Yeah, because right now, for example, if you're a senior, you get in free to all basketball and football. I think you could charge seniors $1 or $2 even on the event, and that would be a lot of money, but it'd be some money. And I know it's a nice thing to get 65 and get something free, but I don't think it'd hurt to pay a couple bucks to see a game, you know?
Yeah, we did look at the fee schedule. We can bring it back for the June meeting if you want to revisit that and adjust it. You know, I'm hearing yes, I'm hearing no, so the board can
No
wrestle with that.
way here. Our seniors, I think we ought to move the threshold down to 55. And I think all kids ought to get into everything. I mean, well, it's supposed to be free,
These are extracurricular activities,
I
so
know.
they're not part of
Part
the
of the
educational endeavor.
Most, just about all of the price or the expenses coming from taxpayers, so
Yeah.
you're passing it back on to the taxpayers.
Quinn had a request for $1,000 in physical education, probably for equipment for middle school and high school gym class. That would be frozen for this
Wait,
year.
wait, go back.
Sure.
Was there apparel down there someplace, athletic?
Up
Yeah.
above that.
That was about,
There was 3 sports that are on the rotation, softball, volleyball, and so as we go over to the apparel, so those are the, let me see, no, those
Dues and fees.
sorry, there's apparels. So these would be the 3 items. I did not adjust those, and the only reason I did not is again because they're on a rotation, and it just defers it, it's kind of like compounding the servers.
What's the timeline on the rotation?
Every 4 or 5 years, depending on the sport. Some sports
I can see football, they get.
that are in shared
Yeah.
spaces go through the uniforms a little bit faster than maybe a volleyball. It doesn't necessarily always grinding on jerseys and pants and so forth, so the 5-year on that. But yeah, that's a place that the board could say, yep, we're just going to freeze on the uniform rotation and defer it a year.
But we do charge, what, per sport for usage? 25?
oh yeah, that's their participation
Basically
cost.
charged it.
Yeah, participation.
Basically, uniform.
Can we highlight that?
Yep,
I
just-
think
add it.
that we could possibly defer that.
Okay, I put them in as deferred, and then we can decide to do otherwise later, if you choose to go back the other way. The next is Future Business Leaders of America. Kip had made a request, and that $39.85 would have to be frozen. I'm not sure, again, I'll have to go into the detail, but basically just freezing expenditures. So I didn't get into what it was or why it was. There may be some justification why some of these things need to come back on, but for now, everything is frozen, other than things that have already been approved. Next is this is yellow only because I wanted to do a name change there. It was called Youth Apprenticeship, didn't really register with what that is, but these are where the dual enrollment credits are coming from. If you remember, the board took action to make students pay 25%, we pay 75%, so the budget was $31,000, reduces now to $21,000.
Andy made a point then that should be reflected in some kind of policy. Do you agree? Do you remember that, Andy?
Well, I think we probably, if that's the board's feeling, we probably need to have a policy meeting, and if that's how well we want the policy to read moving forward. So we're not picking and choosing based on
Right,
who's
right.
on the board.
We did make it part of the fee schedule. Of course.
Luke, what would that go under, would a policy aim in the student handbook?
Yeah, it would be reflected in the fee sheet, which is part of what we publish annually in the paper and give out to parents. There is a policy that is in connection with the early college credit program, and that could come in there. The only piece I'd caution is if it changes from 25 to 50 to 75, it's a policy change, it's 2 readings. It might be easier just to put it on the fee schedule and leave it as a standalone, and let the policy kind of be the other part of it that doesn't have to change every time you change the fee.
Yeah,
How do
my
you
bigger,
feel about that?
well, I just didn't know if the board's piece was to cap credits. If we wanted to cap the number of credits, that's
Okay,
a policy that's starting to develop, the per student credit. If that's
Mhm.
something I was just throwing it out there because it's
it may
something
be
I've
something
read
that
on
we,
that,
okay,
that people are capping at 18. And I don't know that they're capping at 18 or doing 25%, but it could be something we want to look into. Because if we're going to enforce something like that, it needs to be in
Policy.
policy.
No doubt.
Yeah.
so whenever we get back to policy,
Yep. I think
I'm-
Mr. Lindsay and I
Yeah,
are
read
going to
it
work
back
on
to
that, so
policy.
we'll put that on a to-do list.
Right.
Other athletic requests that have been deferred is replacement of equipment in football. This gets a little bit tricky because helmets have a shelf life of 7 years, and after that, they are no longer able to be used, so there's some equipment that needs to be replaced.
has the law changed on those yet?
It has not.
Okay, because then then we don't have any control over that.
Yeah, we do not. So I'll have to check if that's shoulder pads or if it's helmets. Softball had an equipment purchase, replacing equipment. Again, this isn't new equipment, this is replacing existing equipment at $2,000, and dues and fees for $1,875. Usually the dues and fees are in conjunction with tournaments or travel. So that would be deferred. Moving into the wrestling program, personnel services, 1950. That is contracting for services. Get the detail if you want more information. And replacement equipment at 1055 would be frozen, not added to the budget. Moving into choir, they have workbooks. Those would be frozen. That cost would either be borne by boosters, or they would have to find a workaround to not having workbooks. Personnel services at the 800 level, this is just general purchase services for the district. Increased it by 5,000. These would be services that we're contracting with. Could be anything from Upland Hills to professional development groups coming in to train staff on new rules, regulations, laws, so forth. Safety training, any of those kinds of things would be. The legal fee, I reduced that or froze that. This year you'll see that we were over budget by 3,000. We had increased it from 6 to 7. We're just going to freeze it at 6 and hope next year's a better year. Pupil travel, this is a little bit deceiving in that we haven't made our final payment yet for transportation. So the budgeted number and the actual number, if you looked at a 3-year trend, the budget has been above 300,000. And we know typically it stays the same or gets a little more expensive. But we would look to try to find ways to reduce our expenses in travel. And this being a good year, maybe we can find a way to reduce a route or figure something out there.
Sorry, Luke. So you've already budgeted a decrease of 20,000, and then you're going to reduce it another 24,000?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the budgeted will be 200, 250?
74, 654. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That will obviously compromise trips that we're able to take. It might impact field trips and those extra buses that we would run that just may not be able to run anymore. That's an area that I've got to really do some more homework in that final revision to see if that's feasible, but trying to cut those trips down to the extent that we can. 4,000 in property insurance, we know it's relatively flat.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
does
Yeah,
that, does that also include athletic trips, transportation?
That is under a different item, so that's
Okay.
just general athletic trips is right below it. It's already reduced 15.
Got it, thank you.
Yeah. So insurance, property insurance and so forth, I don't believe we need the full $4,000 increase, so we're gonna just freeze that at 17. It will probably run slightly over budget, but we'll look for some savings somewhere else in the district office to try to cover that. And I can send this to everybody so you have it. This, my office and the superintendent, I increased communications by $1,000, so we would freeze that at current levels. That would be all district-wide communications that we send out, newsletters. I'm trying to think of the other communications we would use. We would pay for things like website fees, phone, any of those types of things. Operations in the personnel services, this is under 860, maintenance. So we would reduce maintenance by $4,000. It's currently a $5,000 or $15,000 budget. We would reduce that down to 11 for just general maintenance district-wide. 3,000 in site repairs across the district. This is the place where we remove the capital altogether. That's 100,000. So there would be no projects that we would build into the queue this year. We do again have the 20,000 built in a different place in the location as a contingency. You'll see that later, but that would be a full reduction of any capital, so that would be a significant part of this. We had built in an increase for supplies out at the Options in Education School. We would freeze that budget, so that would be a $3,000 savings.
Do you know what that was for? Can you find out what that was for?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm donating some stuff and I wonder if it'll fall into that.
It's under 411, which is usually instructional supplies.
Okay, well, if we could find out what that was for, that'd be great.
Back to the 100,000 capital expense, and I'm sorry if I missed this. Did you have any, is that all contingency, or did you have certain projects in mind that you would maybe hope to use that money for this coming year?
Yeah, we had projects, I have a list of projects that Roger and I have defined that I can walk through. They're just things that we would no longer do. That would be just some of the things that we try to keep up on. I know we get sometimes criticized for not doing the general maintenance and repairs, but we get into these situations where we have $300,000 to $500,000 of requests that can just go off the queue right now, and we have annually saved about $100,000 to do those projects, so we're inevitably getting behind. This obviously is going to challenge us to kind of address those emerging needs. Things that come to mind right away is the hot water heater that's down here. It's down at the elementary. It's 50 years old, and
You mean the boiler?
no, this is the hot
The
water heater.
hot water heater?
Yeah.
The same age as the boiler?
Yeah, and it's got some significant issues. Obviously, there'd be some efficiency and cost savings because it would be a newer model that runs more efficiently, but it is really on its last leg and just needs to be repaired. The door frame that's outside, if you go out the district office door, you'll see at the bottom it's rusted out. It's a pattern that has happened with many of the doors that we're starting to replace along the building. It's just the next one that just is in need of replacement pretty soon. Those mullions actually start to loosen up and give, and then the door can just be jerked open. So that's something that should be replaced. We can go through the capital list that, just to kind of give you a sense of some of the things that would normally be repaired in a year. Those would be deferred.
I'm really opposed to cutting that. Because we're already that has never been funded anywhere close to what it should be.
Yeah.
And that's really kicking the can down the road.
We would have to have
Problems.
a lot of less than 1,000s to add up to 100,000. The 500s and 750s are really all that we have
I get
left.
it, but
So I'm open, that's why we're working together on this, because we gotta come up with an idea where we're gonna come up with 100 if we wanna put that.
And, we just built a maybe not an ideal secure entrance, but a more secure entrance at the elementary school. And, there's talk about maybe diverting traffic through the office
Yeah.
up in this site to make it a little more secure, somebody just barge in. But that's not in that 100,000 capital
Unfortunately
expense
not.
plans, correct?
Yeah, correct. I would
Just wanna be
suggest
clear
that
on
one
that.
of the best things that we can do at this building, which I know a lot of the attention tonight has been at trying to improve the elementary's needs, but a single point of access here at this building, coming through a vestibule that forces you to come through the office and sign in before you can get into the building. And also then secured in the back of the building at the A.
Yeah.
8 times a day, people are coming in and out of that door,
Yeah.
and it's not secured. A corridor that would connect those two buildings would keep that from anyone coming through. You know, roughly $300,000. I would have to look, there's been some work done around this. I thought the main entrance redo was 150 to 180,000. It's a little bit different than the elementary, you can't just put a second door in. You still have to reroute it through the office and reconfigure the office. There was a plan also done for how an enclosed piece would work in conjunction with just extra storage and a loading dock area for the egg building. If we're back there kind of renovating that, I'll have to look at that number, but that would be a high priority for me, is to secure those 2 access points.
And just as a point of clarification, if we wanted to include that in a capital ask for the referendum, we could include whatever you recommend, you know, whatever
Sure.
the recommended securing of this, of middle school, high school site.
Yeah.
That could potentially be added to that list of projects, correct?
That could be. And I think the upside to that is it still would stay underneath that $12 per month threshold. I'm pretty sure we could get those 2 projects, the secure entrance at the front and the back of the building, and still stay within the tax tolerance.
Okay.
The downside to that is it hasn't been tested in the community. And if somebody wasn't for that project, it could cause the whole thing to fall apart because we didn't find out the plausibility of that particular referendum question. So
Okay.
it could be done in a mini survey off to the side before we get to a November referendum, or before we get to an August resolution, to see if there's support for that. But that would really be the only way to address it, because we would even need 3 years of $100,000 to really do any kind of significant single point of access entry. There might be some other solutions we haven't investigated, but again, that would cause for a contract for services with an architect to come in and kind of do a study of, basically a restudy of what we already have had done, to see if there's maybe a less expensive solution.
Is there plans already kind of been drawn up for those things that we have?
Yeah, there is plans and there is a budget that I can share with the board for what was proposed when one group came through and gave a suggestion. We have worked with actually a couple architects, but another one to actually get into giving a cost analysis needed to charge a fee at that point to draw plans. And so that's when we severed that relationship. In conjunction with a district-wide study, we did get a recommendation for a solution on the single point access and how to secure the back of the school, and we did get a preliminary budget for that. It's kind of, again, a budget not to exceed. There might be a less expensive way to handle it, but at least we can give a rough project total. So we can come back and revisit that.
And whatever budget we have 2 years ago for that,
Yeah.
that's gone. Or, estimate for that.
Around in the corner here, we're almost done. Fund 27 is our special education fund. Jennifer Du Bois, who's our speech and language teacher, had a request for $1,700 of dues and fees. Could have been conference related or professional development. That was frozen in this particular scenario. And that gets us to the bottom. There's one more. Fund 27, hearing impairment. This would be Jenny, I'm not sure if I've got detail here. Jenny Richardson had made a request for, if I look at the 551, this is capital equipment, so there'd be a new piece of equipment at 4510. That piece of equipment in the hearing impairment project or program would have to be frozen and deferred. Bottom line, 318,297 when we include the uniforms. So that gets you to the bottom line. You have a balanced budget, balanced preliminary budget. Then you see what enrollment does in August, and if we have more out than in for a net, or we have more in than out, you'll have a surplus or a deficit that we'll have to further mitigate.
Well, we'd have no problem spending
For sure.
if there's a surplus.
The problem would be if for some reason, we have every year increased our open enrollment amounts, our net amount of open enrollment. And at some point, you start to get to a capacity or a threshold, but there's only so many kids that are leaving their schools to come to Mineral Point. And as that maybe starts to dry up and starts to just flatline or even decline a couple kids, we would have to then go further. And we would literally be in the 50s, the 150s, the 500s, the 750s, and reducing those budgets to try to capture that amount. So that's my best thinking. It is really everything else that's left.
The 31.2 for dual enrollment, that was at the 75%.
Correct. The 31, if we go back to that,
You cut it to 21.
it's actually 21. It shows a reduction. It was already built in So it was 31, we have moved it to 21, is that right? It was 10, went to 31, that is, so,
You increased it 21, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
So there's 31 budget.
31 actual
31 is in
budget,
our
yeah,
budget, that's a difference of
21,000.
21,000, yeah. So that actually should be,
I think it was a little higher than 31 at 100%. I mean, it might be 23,000.
Is there-
So that's a positive.
It might be 8 grand there.
yeah, I was just gonna say, so 23,250 minus the 31 is a net of 7,750. So we would reduce that. That's the amount that we'd reduce that would be student funded out of that 31, so.
Yeah, the
Where are
20,000.
these
Where do you have the community
classes
funds?
in that 30?
Community fund is fund 80, so it's at the very end of the entire list.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it was
None of that will affect the bottom line from an operational perspective, because this is levied on top of the cap.
So it'd be
So anything you do here
75%.
is just either adding to or reducing the overall levy. It doesn't really impact the budget deficit and trying to balance it out.
Why would you move a salary to community fund?
We have already had part of the salary in the community fund because it services the community at large. And that allows some flexibility or wiggle room within our operational budget to be able to backfill with some other services and needs. So we just moved that from underneath the levy to above the levy. And that's really a trend that I've seen more school districts using to try to gain some access to their operation.
Okay, all that talk, does it mean you're robbing Peter to pay Paul?
And not robbing Peter to pay Paul, it's just changing the funding source from being underneath the revenue limit to above the revenue limit.
So we can tax more. That's the reason.
So you can do,
So we can tax more above what we legally can tax.
There are a few reasons why you can, to your point, can levy. And if it truly benefits the community at large, you can put it under your community fund 80. There are some that have even gone as far as taking their middle school athletic program and moved it out of their operational budget, Fund 10, and put it into the community fund 80. But what needs to happen then is that any kid that's in your community has to have access to that. So you can't then just have it available only for students at Mineral Point. So if homeschool kids could be part of the intramural program, or other kids that are even not in our district that wanted to play on the volleyball team or the basketball team at middle school, wanted to wrestle with this program, we would have to open it up to every kid and make it accessible, but you could fund it under 80 as a levy addition, which opens up that money in Fund 10 to do some other things.
Does it still allow us to gain that advantage with the FTEs that we would gain from open enrollment?
It would still allow, yes, yeah, because it doesn't change that piece of it.
Okay.
Yep, that would still be permissible.
And, I mean, let's say 10 homeschool kids joined a summer school program. That wouldn't count, right? Because they're not, or would it?
I think it would count for FTE.
If they joined summer school, you would get to count that. If they just showed up to be part of your sports team, you don't get any count for that.
Okay, but for the summer camp curriculum, which is
Yes,
what you're talking
yes.
about, right?
Yes.
So,
20, I think it's 20% of the full-time.
any reason why we shouldn't do that, Mitch? Given that we don't have a Parks and Rec, you know, that's, has a lot of activities open to the community, and sometimes
Yeah,
a lot of the sports are really
I think
available through the district.
I think last year the law changed where if Larry's nieces and nephews from Illinois came to stay with them for the summer, they wanted to be a part of it, we can allow them in and we can count them as students towards FTE for the summer school program. We can allow that to happen now, the law has changed.
Okay, so the current policy is anyone from the community can join the summer school activities.
I think so. We haven't really received a lot of inquiries or requests, but, you know, somebody wanted to take a summer camp here, or, I'm sure there's been, well, Scott has run it both ways. I'm thinking about the wrestling camp. I know there's been kids from outside of our community that partake in that.
Right.
However, I'm not sure if he's running it through the summer school program as the FTE, or if he's running it as a standalone. He's done it both ways. Yeah. I think I know it's been both ways over my tenure, but I just don't know recently, but yes, the answer is they could. Just like we could take a summer school class from Dodgeville if you wanted to take like a remedial algebra class, and they were offering it. But then again, they would receive the FTE for having that kid, not us. It does behoove us to have a vibrant summer school program. There is a little bit of revenue to be captured. Obviously, I think we calculated last time to the good overall for our revenue versus expenditures. But we only have a finite amount of kids that can only be involved in so many things.
Sure. I just as a comment, if there was some concern about funny math in terms of what we're using community fund for, you know, summer sports open to the entire community seems like a more fitting community fund type program rather than maybe, you know, putting a salary of maybe a staff that doesn't really always help the community. I don't know, but I mean, if there was some concern from the board about that, that could be something that.
When talking with Marcia today, the only reason we haven't put that or looked at that as a real option is there's just not a lot of money attached to that program.
Sure.
Not a lot of savings that
Wouldn't make it easy.
So,
Okay.
So if the board has any feedback, please share. The next step in this process would be to share with the staff some of the proposed freezes. We would learn more about what exactly that means, and that's when I think we would start to hear from concerned staff about freezes or cuts or equipment that was needed but not able to be purchased, and everything that we would build back in, we would have to again. find
So, I'm confused why we have Bill in there and Joelle in there, and we wouldn't have the services of the teachers who are doing the summer program in there and their fees.
Summer school right now is under the operational budget. The question is, can summer school run under the community service budget? Potentially, I can look into that. I am not aware of anybody that runs their summer school out of the community ed fund.
I
Does
mean,
that affect your?
but I don't understand why Bill and Joelle are in here.
They can be considered, and the board can put this back into the operational budget if they choose, but there are other districts that have used this area because they are service to school and their service to community, that they could make the argument that this could be a community service funded piece of the budget. Both have
What's the
responsibilities.
benefit for them?
Nothing. There's no benefit whatsoever, it's just the funding
Frees up their
source.
two salaries for us to use in the regular budget.
It's more of a district strategy.
The community one is above what
What
we
we-
legally can do. That's the reason for it.
Any thoughts on that?
I don't like it, but
His benefits part of the, it is. Right?
Yeah.
Then why don't you like it,
I
Jeff?
don't like the maintenance cut either, because we've been pushing things down the road for years, and we're really gonna compound that. So unfortunately, we got down to 50,000, but we cut everything to get there.
We got down to zero,
You know,
really.
assuming we don't have any problems, like a 50-year-old water heater,
Hey,
and it's coming, Doc. We've been lucky.
Do you want to build back
This is
in the
not gonna be
deficit?
easy.
Do you want to add
Balance the budget.
50,000 for maintenance? I mean, that's not the 100,000, but,
I think we're really,
because otherwise we are pretty skinny.
I'd like to see us build something in there for capital. Just for
I would
example,
too. I
the
think that's-
doors.
Well, I was thinking that might come up in referendum. You know, if you do a survey about school safety, and that's a separate issue, let's say this Underhill Elementary doesn't pass, but I bet you would pass school safety in this building to make it a single entry point and that could go for some of those other repairs that had to be done. I would bet that would pass, you know, because in light of everything that's happening, I bet the majority of people, children or not, would vote for school safety.
And I believe that there will be additional funding shortly from, whether it's over and above what the state has already allocated, the 100 million safety grant application. I think there's going to be additional funds from the federal government to improve school safety.
I hope so.
I think I asked Luke, is education part of that grant?
That I have to check into. There is a requirement,
Well, remember when I talked about the,
yeah, there is a requirement that we have staff trained on trauma-informed care in trauma-sensitive schools, and Can anybody else remember the other acronym, the ACE one? There's two types of trainings that every school district has to have in order to receive the grant. And we have had neither of those go through our district, so we'll have to build that into, the question is, can that be built into the grant? And I'm not sure if that is or isn't part of it. But that's tomorrow from 9 to 3, I'm working with online, a representative from CISA 10 that will help get to the point where we have a template ready to go and all these questions will get answered. So I'm one of multiple schools around the state that are gonna kind of listen into the DPI and Department of Public Instruction and CISA 10 on putting this budget together and what is it that doesn't qualify.
And when do we get the money on that? I mean,
Well, it's an interesting question. I don't know when the money will be released, but they're asking for the projects to be completed prior to the school year. And then within the following year, you have to have the training. There's some other stipulations that go along with that, but
so
it's
the
gonna be a
money's
quick
not been
turnaround.
released for the grant, but they want you to have the work done in August?
Correct. Pretty tight. It'll be very tight.
Yeah, you think?
The deadline's what, June 8th?
June 8 is when the grant needs to be submitted. My understanding is anyone that submits a grant will most likely be funded at the primary level, which basically takes care of making sure every door has a lock, which we already have, so we don't qualify for that. And it does safety film, but it only does it for the single point of entry. So it would be at the elementary front entrance off of Cawthorn, and this one up here off of Ross at the main entrance. Those are the only two that would be able to be eligible.
Couple of questions. One question, one thought. If we get the Charter Year 1 grant for options,
Yeah.
are we able to transfer
Yes,
portions of teacher salary under that grant?
I do believe there's some
Which
opportunity
frees
to,
up some
yeah.
fund $10.
And we will learn about whether we receive the charter funding grant at the end of May, was what we were told. So we are
So
at the end of
So we
May.
may know.
So within the next week to 10 days, we should have an answer on that particular piece. Again, getting back to this is a draft, it's going to continue to iterate multiple times. When we talk in June, it can be a very different scenario, depending on if we receive that grant or not. But to the point that we're going with what we know right now, there is no grant funding and we have a balanced budget.
My other thought would be, we're talking about capital, and we have charged ourselves with a balanced budget. So we may be better off piecemealing capital together when projects come along, understanding it's going to put us out of budget, and to build them back in. And, I mean, I guess if we want to try and pull them elsewhere, we can, but we've all seen the numbers. Because we've charged ourselves with a balanced budget. So that's, unless we change that action, that's what we need to pass.
Does it make sense to pass a preliminary budget balanced now, knowing that there's a few things that we don't feel comfortable cutting by October, and seeing how open enrollment goes, seeing how this grant comes in May, seeing how the safety grant comes in, and then we see what dollars we're dealing with, and then we can add things back in that we feel are a higher priority. Does that make sense, or?
It does. We just have to
Well,
provide
that's
Lucas
kind of what we'll
something,
do.
so July 1 comes, he can start spending again. So we have to have that.
We don't actually pass this till October, correct?
June, you'll come back and pass
We
either
just
this
have
preliminary
or an
budget.
iteration of this.
Right.
So that tells us what expenditures we're authorized to go forward with to prepare for
But as
September
Doc
1.
said, as we find out in July, August, September, the dollars that come in, then we know we've got some.
We can make changes, but
Yeah.
So there's
based
no
on
action on
action,
this, correct?
we should pass the balanced budget and not make
We have to,
assumptions
right.
for
I'm anticipating that that's the charge given, so
Okay,
here's
thank
one
you.
way to do that.
So you don't need an action tonight?
No, that will be part of our June discussion,
Okay.
is the actual approval of a preliminary budget. At that point, we lock down where we're at. It gives the district the authority to make the purchases that have been approved to date over the summer, so when we get to school, we're ready for whatever we can be ready for. And then we have to wait to see what other things materialize. To your point, we can build some things back in later if there's some extra revenue, or the board can choose to use that revenue as additional contingency. Everything will be available to you at that point. You can put it specifically in the capital. That'll be the discussion at that time.
Okay, let's move on. Items for action. What paved the way?
We have, in the narrative, it kind of gives the history of our Project Lead the Way program. We have it at the elementary school, we have it at the high school. We've been trying to find a way to get it into the middle school, but all of our staff are currently filled teaching. Kyle Carey, for example, teaches 7 out of the 8 periods of the day. We just can't offer a 6th, 7th, 8th grade option for Project Lead the Way, and it would require additional training on each of the modules that we'd be introducing, 2 at the 6th grade, 2 at the 7th grade, 2 at the 8th grade. So his suggestion was to reach out to a retiring Platteville teacher, Mr. Smet. Chuck Smet is teaching currently all of the Project Lead the Way suites for Platteville. He has received the certifications to teach those. He doesn't quite want to retire fully, but also wouldn't need benefits as he comes back to a district at a part-time level. He just needs simple salary, straightforward. So he would be offering 2 courses or 2 modules to the 6th grade, 2 modules to the 7th grade, and 2 modules to the 8th grade. You can see those modules and what they include. It is in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics framework. It is mostly hands-on for those that may have had elementary kids that have been part of that pilot program. And this would be in line with our strategic plan, which was to actually implement Project Lead the Way at the middle school. I think it's a great opportunity for our district to fill that void between elementary and middle. Our numbers at the high school, we're not running a Project Lead the Way class this year. We didn't have the numbers to offer that. We'd like to continue to build up those science, technology, engineering groups of people, students, as one sector of the business market that we'd like to try to grow some interest around. So,
Couple questions.
Okay.
So Darlington is running this program at the middle school, is that correct?
they are, yeah.
Okay, is Dodgeville or any other surrounding schools?
Help me out, counterparts?
Nope.
They do not.
Okay,
Darlington runs the full suite, 6-12, right?
Correct.
They run from 6th grade to 12.
and are we running it, Matt, for the K through 5, or was that a 1-year thing, or
Only at 5th, I think
only at 5th grade?
yeah, we have the equipment to do that. I think mathematics and literacy, just the lack of time. But Judy Benish does run some Project Lead the Way kids module.
Mitch, and that brings up a good point, is Mitch and I and Vicki met with Chuck virtually online. We talked about some coordinated efforts of the elementaries initiative, because again, we're leaving it to a teacher that's busy all day long trying to coordinate every grade level's worth of projects. So there is one that, for every grade level, it's kind of a graduated approach where it gets a little bit more complex and the challenging problems get to be a little bit more hands-on and challenging for students. I could pull up the curriculum. It's kind of a neat piece, but if you don't have somebody to organize it, I agree, it tends to fall out from the bottom up. We'd like to embed that into the science class so it's actually part of it. It's not like an extra thing you do in the day, it's actually part of what we do in the classroom itself.
So to be clear, this would be $5,000 per quarter, so that would be an additional $20,000 in staff salary for
Correct.
this coming year. And that is not in the budget currently, is that correct?
That
That
is
we just
correct.
balanced theoretically?
Right, that is correct.
And just to clarify on balancing the budget, after you added in the postponement of the uniform replacements, didn't we correct the math on the dual enrollment credit, and that was an additional almost $8,000?
That is correct, yes.
So now, just to be clear, now if we postpone the uniform replacement, we're almost $8,000 ahead of budget.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Plus, there was another 4,000 in college credits, where the students had to pay 25%.
So we're at 12, so we got 6 left, right? 8.
Oh, so we're at 12.
12.
So we got 8 left.
Thank you.
8 left, right?
And again, the directive is to balance the budget, so I would look to our utilities and look to shave off, especially at the high school level, some of the cost savings that were being referenced at our last meeting. I think there's another opportunity to still have a balanced budget, but also be, and that's the part of the strategic plan, is being strategic about what we decide to fund. We've said no to uniforms, so we can say yes to curriculum for kids.
Personally, I think this is an excellent program that should be added to the school system.
What were the materials, do we have any idea? Because I'm assuming you would need
That is also a very beneficial part to us, that Chuck has worked with David Allen, not David Allen,
Alan Bradley?
Greg Kwong.
thank you, Greg Klum. Because Chuck and Greg work so closely at Platteville, Greg kind of coordinates this at a larger, more regional level. Because he is also coming from Platteville to Mineral Point, he can actually take the kids up with him, deploy them and bring them back, so that the initial investment for us to get into the program would not be anything for equipment, which can be pretty costly when we start to look at some of the kits that we have purchased in the past. And then Greg would be instrumental in trying to help us bring some grants to the table to actually get our own equipment over time. So in year one, we have an answer for that without having to put it more into the budget to be able to use the Platteville kits. Year 2, 3, 4, we would continue to work with John Deere's been a good partner. Project Lead the Way out of Dubuque would be one that we would write a grant for the middle school equipment.
Would Cummins pay anything too for this grade level?
They certainly would. They've been a fantastic partner, so we try to use that sparingly because they've been so gracious to us. But maybe there's a match where John Deere and Cummins come together to partner, so that could be another source as well.
Like that thought.
Okay, what's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion that we approve the request.
Second.
Bush,
Yes.
Chambers,
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Gunlock,
No,
Lindsay,
Yes.
Stefas,
Yes.
Basting.
Yes.
Next on the budget, we had
5,000
Yeah.
server.
We had tabled that, or said no to it, I can't recall. I think we tabled it because we wanted more information. Brought back that information, shared with you some of the correspondences that I'd received. So it is still in the budget currently, so it's not an additional 15 on top of what we just talked about. I did leave it in the budget as part of the proposal going forward. If there's any questions about the correspondence and clarification received from the recommendation of Dependable Solutions, let me know, otherwise I recommend approval.
And this is a June of 19 purchase paired with a July of 19 purchase.
Correct. Which again would be the 18, or, yeah,
Two different
18, 19,
fiscal years.
19, 20 fiscal years.
Piggyback to get the whole project.
Yeah.
so we're just voting on the technology part, not the
Correct.
capital,
Just-
not Fund 80.
No, just the virtual environment.
I'll move to approve the purchase of the server
I'll second.
refreshing.
I'll second.
Call, any other discussion? Bush,
Yes.
Chambers.
Yes.
Dunn,
Yes.
Gunlock,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes.
Basting.
Yes. Capital Budget Fund 80.
No expectation here. There was a couple board members that inquired about if you could use the capital budget, or can you use Fund 80 to purchase capital equipment?
Could you explain Fund 80 to me?
Sure. That is that community service fund that we had worked or talked about. You could possibly move the athletic program to a Fund 80 if it was totally accessible by the community. So if the
Oh, I
community
see.
has access and benefit to it, you can make a case that this would be an appropriate expenditure. What I
You
had
said
understood,
soccer would use it and somebody else?
we have received requests to date for soccer, and the Educational and Excellence Endowment Fund would like to do some fundraising activities out on the stadium field. It would have,
Maybe use it, won't they?
I'm sure, yeah, there'll be lots of non-school affiliated groups that may have an interest in using the field, specifically the sound and/or there could be places for enclosure. I understand the sensitivity around this, and so I just, the question was asked if you could use Fund 80. I did check in with some counterparts. You cannot use Fund 80 to build capital buildings, walls, that kind of a thing, but you can use Fund 80 to add equipment. And again, this would be on top of the levy, so it's something that the community would be paying for through the levy. So it doesn't compete specifically with the operational budget that we now have balanced. So it would be something that would be spread out across the taxpayers rather than going out through fundraising efforts and soliciting donations.
Is the drop in the stadium sound due to the internal people that we've
maybe contacted to do
Yeah.
the labor?
Exactly. That is based on the proposal from our counterparts in Platteville Lifeline. Owner is a graduate of Mineral Point and would be part of that organizational effort to install.
Karen, make a motion? Okay, we'll move on.
So what'll happen?
Nothing.
No action?
No action.
So you know yes or no, it will not happen?
No motion. So no action taken.
Approval of contracts at Public Health.
I did have an opportunity to meet and discuss with Alicia Schnedler, and we talked about the Upland Hills contract for services, occupational therapy, physical therapy, as well as the current athletic training contract with Southwest. We both agreed that at this time, it is in our best interest not to put those out for proposal. And so the backstory quickly is that I don't think that it behooves us. We have a good relationship with Upland Hills right now. We have an affiliation and relationship with the people that are servicing our kids, and we don't want to move those people or move those services away from Upland Hills any more than we have a great relationship also with our athletic trainer. There's really no interest to move that person at this time either. I did give some assurances, and we'll follow up with a letter, that at the time that the people move out of the position, i.e. if Brad were to ever stop providing athletic training services, that we would put this out for proposal, and we would allow Upland Hills the opportunity to solicit that proposal with their own proposal. But right now, we agreed to just move on and continue to be good partners.
And who did you speak with?
Lisa Schnedler, who is the CEO.
Of Uplands. Okay. Are we going to approve these separately?
We sure can.
I would prefer.
Make a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the Upland Hills contract for those contracted services listed.
I second.
Mayor, take a roll.
Okay, roll call. Bush.
Yes.
Chambers.
Yes.
Dunn. Abstain. Gummock.
Yes.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes.
Basti.
Yes.
601.
Motion for Southwest Hospital.
Should we approve the Southwest Hospital contract?
Second.
Any discussion? Let's take a roll, please.
You. Bush.
Yes.
Chambers.
Yes.
Dunn.
Yes.
Gummock.
No.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes.
Basti.
Yes.
601.
Approval of the school special ed teacher.
We are going to table that. We did have an offer pending. I had some optimism that we would have a candidate that we could bring forward to the board. Unfortunately, this morning that I learned that the candidate did not accept the offer, and instead of proceeding with a deeper pool, we would like to repost it at this time and reopen the vacancy to see if there's others that may want to consider the position before we move forward with another recommendation. So I would like to table that action until we have a candidate we can bring forward.
Can you give a reason why the offer wasn't done?
I did not receive a reason or rationale. I know they took a weekend to think about it, and I did receive a correspondence that said with regrets, I decided not to accept the offer. I don't have any more than that.
Okay, does anybody want to volunteer to be appointed the CESA 3 delegate?
I have, the reason this is before you, we still have a little time, but in compliance with the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Evers, requests that the CESA 3 indicates that there's a date, time, and an hour of a convention of school district boards that have a representative that convene. And the date of this particular meeting that is requesting a representative from our school district is, drum roll, July 26th at 6:30 p.m. at Fenimore, CESA 3. It's in the industrial park. So please check your calendars for July 26th at 6:30. One representative is requested, and I wanted to get it on your radar, because I know we're going to kind of go meeting by meeting, and July 26th will come in 2 board meetings. So if there's somebody now, great. If not, it'll come up in June and July, and we'll try to get somebody to walk it.
Okay, we'll just move on and leave that unless somebody wants to volunteer now. Okay, establishment of board meeting dates and times. That was quick.
We,
That was quick.
yeah,
We still have a number of things to go, and we're done at 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
so as we have, before you, the board has yet to get a final calendar of dates. It was proposed to go to Wednesdays. In conversations with Jeff, we are now looking at potentially Tuesdays. The dates before you in this board packet are still the original Mondays. It's just an opportunity for the board to continue that conversation and discussion.
Yes, I'd like feedback. Does Tuesday work any better for anybody else? Since Wednesdays work so bad.
Just so it isn't the second Tuesday of the month, I have a town board meeting.
Anybody have
wrestling in the winters,
You have wrestling
in the winter months for junior high.
on Tuesdays.
Tuesdays, Thursdays, kind of depends. We leave right after school usually.
So you travel.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's usually 6.
So it looks like Monday night's gonna be the
Well,
night.
I mean, I'm just a volunteer, so it doesn't really matter if I can't go to a couple of them, if I can't go. I mean, it works better for everybody then.
From a community standpoint, I think it's problematic just because of a lot of events and stuff going on. Just with
There's
this
athletics
month,
going on Monday night too.
not as many.
Well, I hear from parents that Mondays nights are awful. Kids come from the weekend, they have to get reacclimated to Monday, and so there's not a lot of participation on Monday nights for parents here because, that's the recoup night for.
Well,
Volleyball typically is Tuesdays and Thursdays in the fall, and then there'll be a basketball game, whether home or away. I mean, that's true for volleyball as well, but there's always a basketball game almost every Tuesday as well.
I think if we do Mondays, I think we should move it to a night that doesn't coincide with the city council meeting.
Well, actually, they moved their meeting to our night, didn't they?
I don't know, but
They did.
if we have a chance to schedule
They
it on
really
a
took into
different,
consideration us, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, we've never changed it, that's the only thing it's getting at, so. First Monday of the month, doesn't hurt my feelings, does that work for you?
I think, that would work, yeah.
What do we do
Sure.
on September?
September 17th would remain the same.
Yeah, we'd have to look at these dates, because obviously the first week of September is potentially a Memorial Day or Labor Day, and so that,
And we have
No, it
the
is Labor Day
same.
for sure.
It is
I
Labor
agree.
Day for sure.
I would just recommend that we leave it where it is, second Monday.
I was gonna bring up too, I think we looked at this a long time ago, was there some sort of payroll, or not maybe payroll, but bills payable issue with the first Monday? Anybody recall that conversation?
vaguely, but there is some type of,
I'm thinking there was a reason we didn't move it to the first. So I look for a recommendation from somebody for leave it as is.
I'll move that we leave it as is.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
okay.
So then those are the dates?
Those are the dates,
Okay.
yes.
So do we have a motion to go back into closed session to discuss the superintendent and elementary principal compensation?
motion.
Dr. Dunn, and do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any
roll call on
opposed?
that. We should do roll call just because it requires that.
Okay.
Bush,
Yes.
Chambers,
No
yes.
money?
It's still, yeah, it's a state statute thing. Dunn,
Yes.
Gunlock,
Yes.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Stefas.
Yes.
Bastow.
Yes.
I know it's silly, but